Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. I think by now we know all the people who want to run for president in 2012, even though not actually who will run. But while we wait for the Republicans to decide who's going to be their candidate, I already feel this campaign will be different, and not in a good way. My guest, Bob Shrum, is a seasoned political strategist who in all his years in major politics has never lost his passion and love for it. And that's why I'm anxious to talk to him. I want some passion here. Am I wrong to feel this is going to be a different kind of campaign?
Oh, I think it's going to be a very negative campaign. It's going to be a very negative campaign for the Republican nomination. You could see that in the last two debates. Mitt Romney's only chance, and the Republican establishment is desperately rallying around him, is to go after Rick Perry on issues ranging from Social Security to immigration. I mean, he's committed the mortal sin of allowing the sons and daughters of illegal or undocumented workers in Texas to go to college in Texas.
Unbelievable.
You know, I mean,
and he says you can't build a fence, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, you watched Santorum last night. At one point, he had a slip of the tongue, and he said, "I think he was just going after the immigrant, I mean Latino vote." I mean, you know,
it's just incredible.
Well, what the good news in that is the bad news is the intolerance. The good news is that they're driving Hispanic voters in droves toward the Democratic Party. And a Republican, as Karl Rove has tried to remind his fellow Republicans, can't get elected president without getting about 40% of the Hispanic vote. Then I think you're going to have a general economic situation where even if it's improving, people are going to feel that we've been through a very tough time, will almost certainly feel we're still on the wrong track. And the Republicans in Congress are intentionally, I believe, trying to promote economic ruin as their road back to power. So the president's going to, you know, his campaign, I think, will be generally positive. He'll try to set out a vision of the future. He needs to convey to people that he's the one fighting for the middle class, for jobs, for hardworking families and out-of-work people. But I think the Democratic super PAC's probably going to go pretty hard after whoever the Republican nominee is.
Well, I hope so, because I just can't believe that these are the people who are seriously running for president, and that the press reports them as serious candidates.
Well, you know, it's funny. I wrote in my column in theweek.com a couple of weeks ago that Perry has none of Ronald Reagan's grace, none of his sense of optimism, none of his sense of pragmatism.
Right.
These people are, and I use you know, they have this term in the Republican Party now called rhinos, Republicans in name only, where they, you know, say people like Huntsman really are outside the pale. Well, I think what rhinos means is Reaganites in name only, because Ronald Reagan raised taxes 3 times.
Right.
Ronald Reagan saved Social Security in a deal with Tip O'Neill. Ronald Reagan did the major immigration reform of the last generation with Ted Kennedy. These folks are way far away from that.
Well, you even, I think I read that column, you even mentioned Nixon, too.
Yeah, well, Nixon, look, Richard Nixon, I don't think he was a progressive in domestic policy or even necessarily a moderate, but he wanted a free hand in foreign policy. So when Kennedy and McGovern would say there's a huge problem with hunger in America, Nixon would send legislation up proposing to fight hunger, and they'd pass it. Yeah. When Ed Muskie and Scoop Jackson were really pushing the environment, and right after the first Earth Day, I mean, we forget it was Nixon who passed the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, he wasn't a passionate environmentalist, and actually when he got reelected in his 1973 State of the Union proposed disassembling a lot of the federal government, got absolutely nowhere in a Democratic Congress and with Watergate hitting. But these folks are not in that, they're not in the Nixon tradition, they're not in the Reagan tradition, they're not in the first Bush tradition.
They're totally disrespectful. They're totally, they just, I mean, they can't even carry on a dialogue, conversation, can they, with Democrats?
You know, I think behind closed doors, there are Republicans in Congress who can have a perfectly good conversation with the vice president or the president or people, or Bill Daley or people in the White House staff. But publicly, they're all afraid to show any sense of compromise. And I used to suspect, I am now convinced, that they know that the economic policies they're advocating would damage the economy further between now and 2012, and that's what they want to do. But Boehner is now talking about more cuts in 2012. Now, the stock market and economists, unless they're deeply conservative and ideological on both sides, think that what we need in the near term is some additional demand in the economy, which has to come from the government, and then with medium-term and longer-term deficit reduction. If you do that, though, people are going to get the sense by a year from now the economy is getting better, and the Republicans don't want that.
And if it comes from government, it means also jobs. I
Right.
mean, you can't improve the economy unless people are working, but then you see the Bank of America with its plans to, and all these corporations, I mean, that's the other part of it. There's no control, there's no public outrage at some of this.
Well, one of the problems for corporations, everybody talks about how they're sitting on huge amounts of money, trillions of dollars. They are, but you know, the theory is, the Republican theory, the Herbert Hoover theory, is that the way to get back to prosperity is to establish business confidence by being really nice to business. Now, business is not going to invest tens of billions of dollars because it feels good about how the government views it. Business invests and hires because consumers are out there buying, and business can make a profit. And right now, until there's some sense that this is a sustained recovery, that the demand is there, you're not going to see this. That's why the president's jobs proposal, and you could quibble with parts of it, and the Republicans aren't going to pass most of it, that's why that proposal makes so much sense. But he's going to have to be like Harry Truman. He's going to have to go out there and make it clear to people who's been fighting for them and who's been fighting on the other side. Do you see what Rick Perry said the other day? It was unbelievable. He said, what we really need to do to get this economy going is get government out of the way and let the Wall Street people do whatever they want. Well, how did we get where we got in 2008?
Exactly.
That's what we did. We let the Wall Street people do whatever they want.
And also, how did we get to the deficit we got because of the Republicans?
Well, very little of the deficit is due to Obama. Almost the entire deficit,
terrible.
the overwhelming percentage of the deficit is due to a phony war, not a phony war, a real war on phony premises in Iraq, the continued war in Afghanistan, which I think was done wrong. We should have gone in there with a lot of troops at the very beginning, gotten the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and gotten out.
And the tax cuts.
The Bush tax cuts, you know, which I mean, I can remember in the Kerry in the Gore campaign, it's very frustrating because he would keep saying, I want to give a tax cut to the waitress, you know, and share the fruits of prosperity, and it will have no impact on the budget. We finally found a way to talk about it, which was the average middle-class family was getting a tax cut that was worth a Diet Coke a day, whereas people at the top were getting hundreds of thousands and in some cases millions of dollars.
And it's the total inability to, if you bring that up, then they say, oh, you're trying to shift and you're blaming the Republicans when you shouldn't be, and all this. I mean, this guy's been president for 3 years. That's
well, he doesn't have the benefit that Roosevelt did. And I'll tell you what, Roosevelt had there were two big differences. First of all, the Depression had gone on for over 3 years by the time Roosevelt came to office. So people had a sense of how deep it was, how bad it was, and they had patience with him. The second thing is we didn't live in a world of instant communication where people demanded instant satisfaction. I do think at the beginning the administration made a couple of mistakes. I think the president was probably wrongly advised that the first stimulus package, the $800 billion, $900 billion, would solve the problem or at least get the economy moving in the right track. And so you had Christina Romer, who was running the Council of Economic Advisors, saying unemployment's never going to go above 8.5%. I mean, look, you and I have been in politics a long time. You don't create a benchmark out there unless you're absolutely certain you're going to meet it. Unless you're trying to challenge the country to do something really fundamental, like go to the moon before this decade is out. That's a different thing. That's setting a goal. But to say we'll never go above 8.5% was a big mistake.
Well, is it also, do you think, because of the color? Can we be honest about this?
Oh, sure. In fact, there's a study out today of who constitutes the Tea Party, and the two biggest drivers appear to be really deeply conservative ideology and racial resentment. And I don't see why we can't say that. Look, they carry the signs they carry at some of their rallies scream it. Now, of course, when I say this, people will accuse me of playing the race card. I love it. The whole idea that people who are playing on racial fears or racial suspicions, when that's pointed out, say, aha, you played the race card.
And anger. I mean, they don't like it that there's an African-American being the president.
Look, Ronnie, we are going through a really fundamental time in this country where the country is going to be majority non-white. It's going to be very diverse. Hispanics are going to be a very big percentage of the population. Gay people are being brought in a serious way into the society and into the culture instead of being forced to hide in the shadows. And that's traumatic for lots of people.
It's very threatening.
And when we've gone through this before. We went through this if you think about the early 1960s, the civil rights movement, the beginning of the women's movement, all of this, that was very threatening to lots of people. And you had really paranoid organizations like the John Birch Society rise up. But they didn't get much oxygen because we only had 3 major networks that did news every night. And Walter Cronkite, if you'd said, let's put something on about the John Birch Society thinks President Eisenhower is a crypto-communist, would have said, never.
Right, never.
Not on my program.
So now we have the cable shows that are everything, and this twittering,
There's
everything.
so much information that it doesn't matter whether something's true or not. In fact, people can have their own alternative versions of truth.
It's because there's so much time and ability to fill it, And they make it up. That's the other part. It's always been a secret to me that women have always been intimidated by men but men know how to look important and look as if they know what they're talking about. But the Republicans have managed to do that. That's what I don't understand.
Well, I mean, look, I do think Democrats have a tendency at times to be too accommodationist and too reasonable. But it is the way you make a pluralistic society with 2 major political parties work.
Right. We've never had anything like
No,
this.
I mean, you know, look, in 1963, it's a pretty fraught time. JFK has proposed the Civil Rights Bill. He's proposed a major tax cut to get the economy going, and a lot of controversy. And suddenly, in a huge breakthrough, he negotiates a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union, and he talks to Everett Dirksen, who was the Republican Senate leader, and Dirksen said, we'll get you the votes, because it was the right thing to do for the country.
Well, that's the other thing. I think the profiles in courage, there's not very much courage these days. The Republicans, I mean, the old time, the establishment.
More profiles and less courage.
Exactly. I mean, the Republicans, now that they're worried that they may get Perry instead of Romney, they should have been there before. The Republicans in the Congress are so afraid of losing their next election. The world goes on if you lose an election. It isn't that important, only to you, right?
Yeah, although I think that this is
Don't
a pretty.
you think
I think
they're
it's a
threatened by that with the re-election prospects?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fateful election, and the stakes are very high.
Well, I agree with you.
You know, in terms of the Supreme Court, in terms of women's rights, in terms of how we're going to treat gay people in this country, in terms of the maldistribution of income, so that people at the top have almost all of it, and
it's a critical.
We're hollowing out the middle class.
It is a critical election. Yeah. But I think for the same reason, the lack of courage of the Republicans, I mean, of the Democrats, who are saying, oh, we're worried about Obama. You know, it's so easy to criticize him. Why are they doing that?
I don't know. You know, the old Will Rogers line, I'm not part of any organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Look, this president has achieved historic things. To begin with, a health reform that people fought for, starting with a Republican, Theodore Roosevelt, for 100 years. Financial reform. He prevented a depression. Now, one of the problems, of course, with that is the stimulus bill did prevent a depression. It did save several million jobs, but if your job was saved, you don't know it.
That's true.
No one comes and says, by the way, your job was saved.
Yeah,
you only know if a job was created and you went into it. But if you the rescue of the automobile industry, otherwise this country would have no automobile industry. The arms control treaty with the Russians, which, you know, there was a lot of partisan opposition to. It's an extraordinary record, and, you know, people get mad at him for some of the compromises. Like last December, he agreed to a temporary extension of all the Bush tax cuts, in return for which, by the way, he got extended unemployment compensation. Otherwise, you know, all these unemployed folks would have been left with nothing. And he also got the payroll tax holiday. Now, what he was really achieving was a less efficient form of stimulus than you would get, or demand creation than you would get by spending directly, but it was the only thing he could get. So he's being pragmatic.
Exactly.
Roosevelt was pragmatic. I mean, Kennedy was pragmatic.
You're supposed to be pragmatic if you're president. I can't understand the progressives. I mean, I always thought, you know, I don't like the term progressive. I'm an old-fashioned, I guess, liberal.
I'm a liberal.
Yeah, me too. But this nonsense that he didn't get a single payer in the health insurance, I mean, what is that all about?
You know, in the summer before he died, Senator Kennedy wrote an article, cover piece for Newsweek, which I wrote with him, and I can say that because it was credited in the piece.
It's all right. I'm
at
not
his
going to knock you
insistence.
for saying it.
No, at his insistence.
Yeah.
And he said, look, it may not, the final bill may not be exactly what people want. It may not be perfect, but pass it, and then
We'll change it.
If you know, in the years ahead, if you know, if you have the votes and you have the arguments, you can change it.
Right.
But the notion, for example, that he should have said, I will never extend the Bush tax cuts, even if that means that millions of people get no unemployment compensation.
Right.
You know, that's easy for a bunch of ideologues who have a job and food to say. I think it's a tougher decision if you're actually sitting there thinking of the human consequences and the consequences to the economy.
Right. This new joint committee that's going to solve all the problems with the budget, right? What do they call it?
The super committee.
The super committee. They're going to do long-range planning. I mean, I hope a little bit of long-range planning. But what they decide isn't going to be written in stone. So if
it has to be an up or down vote in the House.
All right, but if Obama wins in 2012, we don't have to keep following. If suppose we had a Democratic Congress,
well,
you can pass other legislation, can't you, and change policies?
Well, the problem with passing legislation is you now need 60 votes in the Senate. I think it would be, it's not going to be easy. In fact, I have to bet against it if I was betting, for Democrats to hold the Senate next time.
Really?
Yeah. It's just the seats that are up, you know, you could easily, I mean, some of them are just gone. North Dakota, I think, is gone. So you could lose the Senate, but you're certainly not going to have 60 votes. And then until you get back, you know, a center-right moderate, you know, moderate's a poisonous word in the Republican Party, but a center-right Republican Party, it's going to be hard to get things done. Orrin Hatch used to do deals with Kennedy all the time. I mean, children's health insurance was created in this country by Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch. Right. Now Orrin Hatch is afraid to be for anything.
Exactly, but look at Orrin Hatch's opponent is gone, so why doesn't he now step up?
Because there's another Tea Party guy out there who's going to run against him.
That's what you lose respect for people like that. I can't keep it anymore. It's just, they should be standing up for these things. And so when you say you're not going to lose control of the Senate, it's a dagger in my heart.
No, I think we probably will lose control of the Senate.
You don't think that...
But there's one big thing that's going to happen with Obama's reelection, and that is the Bush tax cuts, at least for people at the top, will go away. Right. They expire.
But you don't think that that the Tea Party, if they do get the control of the party and if Perry is nominated...
I think Obama will win.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that Obama's going to win. Why am I this way?
There are a lot of people nervous about it, but but I think, you know, because they have all these rubrics, like no president can be reelected with over 7.2% unemployment, because that's what Reagan was reelected with.
It's like if you step on the crack, something, you know, your mother's back is going to be broken.
Yeah. Before Reagan, you would have said no president can be reelected with unemployment over 5.6%.
But then they raised.
You know, and then he carried 49 states when it was about, people actually thought it was 7-4 on election day. And the report on 7-2 didn't come out till afterwards. But he actually had unemployment about where it was on the day he was inaugurated. But it had gone up massively, and it was coming down, and people felt it was going in the right direction. I don't think we're going to think it's morning in America on Election Day, but maybe people will be seeing the first streaks of dawn.
I mean, I just don't see how that we can get almost half of the country ascribing to the policies that we're hearing from the Republican Party right now.
Well, some of the people who are drawn to that and say that they're either going to or might vote for Romney or Perry are just frustrated, you know. And for them, the election's a referendum. That's why it's very important, and I think the Obama campaign will do this, for them to turn this election into a choice. Mm-hmm. But I think you have a lot of people. We talked about this a little bit earlier, who are completely discombobulated, not just by the economy, but by the profound changes going on in our country. You know, I mentioned the early 60s. Let's go back 100 years before that. The waves of Irish Catholic immigration coming to the U.S., and you suddenly have the rise of the Know-Nothing Party.
And the results.
Do you know why one of the reasons the Washington Monument, they stopped construction work on it for a long time? The Civil War was the biggest reason.
Too many Irishmen building.
The Pope sent a cornerstone, a piece of marble, and the Know-Nothings organized at night and stole the stone and threw it in the river. I mean, and you know, they burned churches.
Yeah, terrible.
So, and look, the other thing I didn't mention, look at the controversy over the Park 51 mosque. I mean, the very idea that we're going to say the First Amendment means you have a freedom to practice every religion except Islam is, you know, except there were people who would have said in the 1850s you have the freedom to practice every religion but Catholicism. And there were people in this country at one time who would have said, you know, I don't think Jews really belong here. So it's, you know.
But that was just stark prejudice, not fear.
Well,
I mean,
some of this is stark prejudice.
Yeah.
Some of this is stark prejudice.
Most of it, especially when it comes to the president. Well,
politics. What do they mean when they say, let's take our country back? From whom?
Right.
From this guy, yeah.
Yeah, and the government is broke, and it's all poor Obama's fault, and it's not theirs. Let's go local. Politics is local. There's a congressional race, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. But it's being made into a referendum on the president, and in fact, it is the terrible choice of the candidate to run. I mean, there shouldn't have been a special election. It should have been a primary. People should have been able to vote in a primary as to who they want. Instead, this is, so I think it's a lesson to New York politicians, but I don't think they'll listen to it.
Well, you know, yeah.
They can blame Obama.
Yeah, look, I hope I am going to end up saying Congressman Weprin, but I'm doubtful about that right now. We'll see, by the way, whether or not these party organizations actually have any strength to turn out votes, because this is close enough that if the organization really had strength, it could pull it out. But I think what happened was that Joe Crowley, who's the party chair, wants that district to go away. So didn't want somebody elected who was going to say, you know, I kind of like this job. I think I'm going to run for it again. So they picked a weak candidate who doesn't appear to know basic facts, and for whom these debates have been a disaster. And then you have thrown on top of that, you know, Ed Koch and a number of other people saying, you know, Weprin, who's Orthodox, as I understand it, and who has family living in Israel, is suddenly you're supposed to vote against him to show your support for Israel. And then they want, and the final straw on this is to blame Obama. The truth is, any other reasonable Democrat
would have walked away with it.
Would have certainly have won.
Right, it's just incredible. But it also points up, I mean, if you pay attention to New York politics, do you at all?
Sure.
Yeah. So we have the...
Since I first met you 42 years ago.
Term limits in the city council. So Weprin is term limited out. His brother is in, their father was the speaker and a very likable guy. I don't know if he was as smart as he should. I'm not talking about his smartness. He was just a very popular man. So you got two sons. So one is in the state assembly, the other's in the city council. The term in the city council expires, so the son in the state assembly comes into the council and he goes up into the state assembly. And he's not the only one. I mean, there are dynasties all over that are just giving these things. It's the voters' faults because they're not paying attention.
Well, it's also that, you know, term limits were stupid.
But they were stupid.
It was a stupid
but
mistake.
The politics in this city is so disappointing. And now we're going to have a mayoralty race soon, and I just don't know.
Well, I like some of the Democrats.
Candidates. I mean, there is no doubt that some of them are good, but it's just what I'm saying is that we have lost any of the general political spirit we used to have in the city, and in organizations that had more than their own interests at stake.
You know, that is interesting because New York used to be a very politically conscious city, very focused on politics. The country has become much more focused on politics, and I think New York less so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the politics hit a high point after World War II, basically, with the veterans coming back and, you know, the ADA, the Americans for Democratic Action, people paying more attention to things, and now nobody's doing it. So let's go back. I'm sorry to digress, but it's so frustrating to me to watch these things happen. I mean, just look at how Crowley became, I know he's a congressman and we need all the Democratic votes, but the incumbent congressman resigned after they could change the name on the ballot, and he was also the county chair, so he hands it all down. You know, I mean, this is not the era to do.
Well,
things like
New York's election laws have never been a model of democracy.
They haven't. No, they're terrible. The other thing that fascinates me about the candidates running is that I always thought everybody knew more than I did, and I had to be really, you know, feeling very secure in what I was going to say before I could say it. These people, they just make up the facts.
Well, that's what I said. They have alternative versions of reality. I mean, Michelle Bachmann thinks the shot that was heard around the world was fired in New Hampshire, not Massachusetts. Elvis Presley's death day was his birthday.
Well, that's all.
But then when you get to serious issues, she's every bit as
ignorant.
out there. And look, Rick Perry, when he was gave that incoherent defense of his position on climate change, says Galileo was outvoted for a while.
Well, nothing.
does he actually believe that the sun goes around the earth because the Bible tells him so? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Right. But then when he tried so hard to withdraw from the Social Security problem, and he couldn't do that very convincingly.
Well, I thought Romney nailed him last
Yes,
night
he did,
because I don't know if it's going to matter. I think he still has a very good chance, very strong chance to be the nominee.
Yeah.
But you know, when he says, "Well, I'm just trying to talk about, you know, holding it together and making it better, and the present retirees and those near retirement will be okay, but you know, we got to think about changing it for people beyond that. And by the way, maybe states should opt out." And I mean, the more he talks, you say to yourself, the more trouble he's getting himself into. And then Romney looks at him and says, "But you said it was unconstitutional.
Yeah.
You said it never should have been done.
Right.
We need to save Social Security, not destroy it."
Yeah. And then
now Romney himself, by the way, is for private accounts, which would destroy
is not
Social
very
Security.
good either.
He looks moderate by comparison.
But he looks so uncomfortable, I think. He's always got that smile.
Did you ever go to the Hall of Presidents or the Lincoln exhibit at Disneyland?
No.
Well, they have a thing called animatronics. Now, I haven't been there in years and years and years, but Lincoln would rise from his chair stiffly, and he would be like this, and he went 7 years ago. And that's how Romney talks. I mean, it looks like he has a stick straight up his back.
And he's trying, he's just trying, I think, hard, but he just can't do it.
He's not a natural politician.
All right, well, Bob Shrum, I hope you'll come again before the election, and we'll talk some more about what's happening.
Anytime.
And I hope that we do carry the Senate.
So do I.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.